Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome everyone to our admin webinar today. We are going to be talking about how you, admins, are critical change agents. This is one of the top rated sessions from Dreamforce just a few months ago, and Liz Holinka, who is presenting, was generous enough to format this in a webinar so that we could get this amazingly awesome information to you virtually. So I mentioned Liz Holinka is our awesome presenter today. She's a sales operations manager at Silverline, a longtime awesome Salesforce ecosystem community participant. She's spoken at Dreamforce several times. She's amazing. We're going to hear from her in just a couple minutes. I'm Jillian Bruce. I'm an admin evangelist here at Salesforce, and it's my pleasure to empower, inspire, and enable people like you, listener, to be an awesome admin. Before we get into any of the content today, just a reminder that you should only make purchasing decisions based on currently available features and functionality. So their forward-looking statement slide, you will see it at the beginning of every Salesforce presentation. So if you've never seen it, welcome to Salesforce. Today, we have a lot of ways you can connect with us. So we have so much great content that we put out as the awesome admin team here at Salesforce. Much of it is contributed from amazing, awesome admins like yourself in the community. We are on all the platforms, so you can find us on Twitter at Salesforce Admins No I or the hashtag #AwesomeAdmin. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, where you can find past webinars and presentations. We also have a great website, admin.salesforce.com, where you can find everything that we do, blog posts, podcasts, events, and webinars, and even more. So make sure you check that out. It's kind of your home base for everything as an awesome admin. For today's webinar, I want to remind everyone this is definitely being recorded. This will be available shortly after the webinar. It takes us a little while to get the video up and together, but the slides and the content will be available to everyone after this webinar is complete. If you would like to participate today in the webinar, we highly encourage you to do so. So we have a group on the Trailblazer community called Salesforce Admins Webinars. You can also use the bit.ly there to access the group very quickly. Reminder for bit.lys, capitals do matter, so make sure you capitalize that A, W, and G when you're typing that into your browser. Don't wait until the end to ask your questions. So get in that community and start posting your questions as Liz is presenting. We're going to have a few minutes for Q&A at the end, so we're going to pick from those questions so you can get some live answers from our expert, Liz. All right, now I am going to hand it off to Liz because she's going to get into today's content. She's going to go over what is change management, 5 ways you can enable effective change, and then at the end we'll go over some resources and have some time for Q&A. So Liz, take it away.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. I thoroughly enjoy sharing how Salesforce skills and other business skills, such as change management, can help propel careers. Today, we're going to talk through change management and how, most importantly, that you can start applying those skills today to enable change effectively in your organization. So what is change management and why should you care about it? Well, change is inevitable. Changes they come all the time, and yet for some crazy reason, we are all always so resistant. I mean, I still, even being, knowledgeable about change management skills, am still resistant to change sometimes when I'm approached with it. As a Salesforce professional, Salesforce admin, we sit at the center of change within our company. I mean, we're lucky enough to even have the power to enable change. And I'm not talking about change sets or updating pick lists or adding workflows. You have the ability to enable organizational change and really be a change agent. You can impact success within your company by beyond wielding your rock and Salesforce admin skills. And so with some planning and thought, you can demonstrate change management skills that will lift off change with success and, most importantly, will help you earn some recognition within your company. So before we dig in today, let's talk about what is change management. We're going to use a working definition from the ProSci organization, which they happen to give out, well, you have to earn it, but they give out change management certifications. And they sort of set the bar globally for what change management is all about. And their working definition is a set of tools, resources, processes, skills, and principles for managing the people side of change to achieve the required outcome of the project or initiative. And I'm highlighting people because we often focus on the technical part as a Salesforce administrator, and sometimes we lose sight of the people side, or we just don't even think about it because we're too busy building great things. But the people side of change is what really allows you to have strong adoption and have a smooth change acceptance policy, change acceptance. So change is a journey. And this is a chart that is used, through ProSci and some other leading change management organizations. But change is a journey, and most of the time we're dealing with our stakeholders and end users that are living in the comfort and control. They're very happy, with what's going on in their job, and they're able to do everything. Then all of a sudden, somebody comes in and wants to make change, and every person that goes through the cycle has this moment of fear, anger, and resistance. And we've all been there. We may not have been fearful or angry, but I bet every one of us on this webinar can count a handful of times where we've been a little bit resistant to change, especially at work. But once you get through some of that, you go through the inquiry and experimentation where you're getting your hands into the app and you're changing things, and you're on the new world with the change, and you start to experiment and realize, okay, it's not so bad. And then the end users, the stakeholders start to accept and learn it, and then eventually get back to this comfort and control. And guess what? We start the process all over again. And so that's why it's important to start to fine-tune your change management skills, because you will be able to help your stakeholders and end users move through this cycle more smoothly. And you may even be able to shorten the time that people spend in the fear, anger, and resistance part of this cycle. And so ultimately, using change management skills with your amazing Salesforce skills will help your company and your career. So they go together hand in hand. And I love this. This is I always love picturing the mascots having a great time. This is what I picture you with your change management and Salesforce skills, celebrating the success of your projects. Because you are probably already practicing change management skills and you're not even thinking about it. So for example, when the release notes come out, if you start testing and figuring out how the release will impact your end users in your Salesforce instance, you're doing change management. How many of you have, experienced the unanticipated angry user when you've made a change? We've all been there. A little bit of change management could have helped that process. And the thing is that often when we're thinking about change, we're usually thinking about it with large projects, right? We associate it with, big giant projects that, they need change management in order to make sure that they go through. But there is a scale to change management. And let's take a look at it. Change management or our projects and changes are on a scale. And a lot of times when we think about change management skills, we're associating it with radical projects. Think about implementing Salesforce at a company that's never had a CRM. That's a radical project. But most of the time in our roles, day to day, we're on the lower end of the scale. We're closer towards incremental. And incremental change is where you can start to build trust within your organization. So if you start to practice using your skills, on the lower end of the change scale and building trust with your end users and your stakeholders, you'll eventually be able to more effectively implement change when you get that large project, when you be given that radical change opportunity within your company. And as change becomes more radical, you have to build that trust. So it's much easier to do it earlier in the smaller projects, incremental change, so that they're more willing to hop on that journey through change with you. And I will say too, as you start to build trust, you will also, grow your career, because people will have faith in and recognize how quickly and effectively you can enable change. So let's talk about the 5 ways today you can start to enable change. The first one is understand the why. So the first step to building trust on this change journey is to be able to articulate why the change needs to happen, and be able to communicate it effectively. So to do that, you have to understand, like, what is the compelling business case? Like, what is causing this need for change? You have to specifically understand what is happening. Like, why is it happening? And I recommend, with any change, no matter where it is on the scale, whether it's incremental all the way up through radical, that you have at least 1 to 2 sentences crafted about the change and why it's important. And I stress this because we've all been there, where we've asked somebody like, well, why do we need to do this change? And you get the very unsatisfying response of, well, because this VP of such and such wants it, or leadership wants it. And that doesn't build trust. I mean, initially when you hear that, you think, oh, well, God, why do I have to do it because they so-and-so? But if you can talk about the business reasons behind it, 1 to 2 sentences may be all that you need. People will understand more about why they should accept the change and, maybe even become a champion of it. So depending on the scale of change, you may need to make a business case. And I'm going to go into more detail about the components of a business case on the next slide. But I want to highlight a key business skill for Salesforce administrators is to be able to build a business case. I remember when I had my first role as a solo admin, I had to build out a business case for the CEO of the company to make the case from upgrading from professional to enterprise. So starting to build up business cases with some of these smaller incremental changes will help you scale that business case process for when you get like the bigger, meatier projects. So business case has, some basic components that should be included with all of it. So you should always begin with the data. Is there data available to support the change? Have we gathered and analyzed it? For example, let's just say the data is telling us that the customer response time has grown from 12 to 24 hours. That's a clear problem, right? Like, that's doubling the amount of time it takes, our fake company to get back to their customer. So then you have to dig in and understand what the problem is and define it. Like, what is causing this? What's the, is there something that's happened that maybe the calls aren't routing properly anymore? You have to be able to clearly articulate the problem. Then after that, you have to understand and articulate the sense of necessity. Like, how necessary is this change? Can you relate it back to improving specific metrics? And lastly, what is the risk of status quo? What is the risk of complacency? And this is a big one, because this is the one that gets people thinking when you're developing a business case is, what if we don't change? What if we just leave it as it is? What could continue to happen, or what will happen? A business case, sometimes will take a paragraph, or, sometimes a larger document and even a PowerPoint, depending on your stakeholders. But using a clear business case helps to build trust. It helps you to understand and articulate the why. And most importantly, your stakeholders will recognize that you've thought through the problem, and they'll trust the recommendations or the things that you're enabling. So after you go through your business case, the next thing you have to do is plan, right? And Salesforce administrators by nature are great planners, right? Because we have to map out workflows, work in process builder, take requirements. So we are great at planning. We spend a lot of time planning the technical portion of our roles, and how we want our, we spend a lot of time thinking about like our workflows and ways we want our organization to take full advantage of the latest release. But sometimes we don't spend enough time planning on how to enable that change effectively to maximize the investment of our time building and creating it. So when you think about planning, again, using the description, you can pull that right from the business case. Think about the goals for the change. Are they clearly defined? Is it just one, or is it two? Is there many? Is it too many? What does success look like? When you're planning, like, how will you determine that this has been successful? Thinking back to our 12-hour versus 24-hour customer response time problem, would success be getting back to just the 12-hour response time, or would it be 8-hour response time? If it was me as the administrator, I'd want to be like, hey, we need to shorten this even more than 12 hours. But maybe just to triage the problem, getting back to 12 is sufficient. Is the vision clear? So do you have a clear vision of what it should look like? And the vision should include the necessity for change. So again, pulling from your business case. And bonus points, if there's any way you can align it to the strategic vision of your company or any objectives that the company has for their year. Lastly, not lastly, I like to combine them. Those stakeholders and communication are key parts that need to be planned for when you're enabling change. So how do you find your stakeholders? First of all, what is a stakeholder? A stakeholder is anyone who has an interest in your project or a perceived interest. We've all experienced that person, right? You may not think that they should care about what you're doing in the Salesforce instance, right? Like, why are they caring about that change? It doesn't matter. If they think that they should care about what you're doing, they are a stakeholder. It baffles me. Some person cares so much about it. And usually it's because I haven't spent enough time talking with the stakeholder to truly understand what their interest is. Or maybe explaining to them, how the instance works, because they may not have the proper understanding of a certain area. So if there's anyone who has an interest in your project, how do you find them, right? I mean, usually what I say to start with is think through the process that you're changing and map out each individual that touches that process. But I would take it a step further than that. Once you have that list of people, that's those stakeholders that touch the process, when you talk with them, because you have to talk with them, leave no rock unturned. Ask them who else should be involved, because you may find out that maybe it's the executive assistant that's doing things in the app you have to talk to about their work that's changing, but they may be pulling reports for an executive who cares about that specific field that you're updating or something. So be sure that you extend it and ask who else should be involved. I also suggest keeping a list of stakeholders for any key area of your instance. So for example, all who get involved with the sales process should be documented as anybody who would probably care about the opportunity object. If you're going to change something with that, you have a list at the ready of who you can ask immediately. And then another thing I recommend too is we've all built custom objects. If you have a custom object, make sure that you document all the stakeholders related to that object when you document the object, because I guarantee when somebody wants to change it 2 years later, you'll want to understand who was part of that decision-making process to build out that custom object from the get-go. And lastly, from a career standpoint, stakeholders are amazing. As you start to build out this repeatable process for change enablement, they're going to trust you. Not only are they going to go on the change journey with you, faster and better, but they'll also reach out to you potentially for other opportunities within your company. One time, in my career, I was fortunate enough to lead a change project, and a stakeholder ended up contacting me 2 months after the end of that project to help him lead another project, because he was so happy with how I had enabled the change effectively. So you never know, your stakeholders could be the next person that gives you a stepping stone in your career. So the next thing with stakeholders that's important is communication. And communication, it's funny, we're all born communicating, right? Yet it's the number one soft skill that companies look for when they're hiring people. I don't I think there's always just an art and a balance to how do we communicate effectively. So when you're thinking about communicating change and enabling change, consider first, like, what is the purpose of the communication for each group? And when I say group, I say categorize your stakeholders. Who needs to be aware of the change? Who needs to be supported through it? Who needs to be involved in it? So when you get that stakeholder list, even if you build that template out that you use repeatedly, just give an A, S, or an I to who needs to, how to communicate with them. Determine what needs to be communicated as well. There is the ability to over communicate. I mean, we've all had those long emails where there's like 10 paragraphs and you're like, what am I reading? So, just be clear on what needs to be communicated. The best thing you can do sometimes is ask, when it comes, especially to the communication method, like, ask people how they want to be communicated with. Ask your stakeholders, this is, and it can vary by the scale of change. If you are, moving towards the radical side of change, you're probably having webinars and quick sheets and developing all sorts of communication to help with the change. If it's incremental, it may just be a chatter post, right? It just depends on the preferred method, but I would suggest that you at least start to set a pattern for how you do that communication. When and how often, that's another thing that I would go back to your stakeholders and ask them their preferences. There will be some that say, oh, just tell me when it's done. I guarantee those are going to be the ones that would be like 3 weeks later, why didn't you update me? So, while you want them to tell you how often they want to receive communication, I'd still recommend like at least doing one update if they tell you, to tell me at the end. The other thing to consider, and I've learned this pretty late in my career, was should the messages always come from you? Like, do you have a super user that is excited about something that you're enabling? I would ask that user to be a champion communicator for you. You can have messages come from the top down too, but if you can have somebody that is like in the weeds, working in the system that you're changing all the time or the process, see if they can also be a champion of communication for you. But I just want to highlight the communication skills are essential for business and for administrators. They're the top skill that people look for. So start to practice it. Ask for feedback with all of your stakeholders so that you can improve it. But I guarantee if you have excellent communication skills, you will be recognized internally. And lastly, the fifth way that you can enable change effectively, and I may argue that this may be the most important one, is to listen and empathize. A little bit of empathy truly does go a long way. As admins, we have to have the ability to understand and share the feelings of our stakeholders and end users. It's imperative. We can communicate well and enable change within our organization. You cannot do it with what I'd say is clicking a mile in their shoes. Most of you probably know Mike Gerholt. He talks about SABA, Salesforce administration by walking around. That is probably the number one way for you to be able to listen and empathize with your end users and stakeholders. It will mean so much to them, especially if you can have them show you some of the challenges that they're encountering and not tell you. And if you don't have the ability to like get up and walk around the floor, I work virtually, set up meetings with people, even if it's like a 15-minute meeting, try to touch as many of your users on a quarterly basis as possible. Because we know change is never easy and it brings out a lot of emotions, unexpected emotions sometimes. Again, like I said before, I'm still surprised by the reaction some people have to what I consider to be small changes. But change is a constant journey. And as you develop your change enablement skills and best practices, empathy will help you, most importantly, help you move them through that change journey. So everything comes full circle. For today, think about what of the 5 things that you can do which one of the 5 things you can use today to help your end users start to move through this change journey more smoothly? They can't skip the stages, right? I think the biggest thing that you can do is help to minimize the bumps through the fear, anger, and resistance portion of this circle. And if you can do that and build more trust, I guarantee that you are truly on the path to what I like to call the change enabler. Each of you, all of you, are change enablers and can be a positive agent for change within your organization. You will implement the great things that you build in Salesforce more smoothly, more successfully, and most importantly, your end users will appreciate it and trust you, and they will be more inclined to go with you on those change journeys as the scale becomes more radical. So there are also, if you want to keep your learning going after today, which of course I recommend, there's lots of resources. Of course, there's a trail. There's a Drucker School Organizational Change Leadership Trail that you can hop on. Also, the online learning platforms, Coursera, Udemy have stuff. Consider certification. If you really love the people portion of it, spend some time looking at the certifications from ProSci and Association of Talent Development. That's where mine came from. And then today, I ask you to commit to focusing on at least one of the 5 best practices. I'm certain if you use empathy and listening skills, it will take you a long way in your Salesforce career. And thank you all so much for joining me today and going on this webinar journey. It's been really fantastic to be able to share this information with you.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was amazing. I think change management is absolutely one of the core, most important things to making someone an awesome admin. So I hear it across the board from people I talk to all the time. I think your presentation captured the importance and kind of how you can start tackling this. Reminder, we've got some questions in the group, so I'm going to ask a few of those right now. Also, before we get into questions, there will be a survey that you all get sent. We'd love to know what you think of this webinar so that we can help plan more amazing webinars like this in the future. And as a reminder, the slides and the recording will be available after this is complete. Give us like a day or 2 to get that up. So let's get into some questions. Liz, you ready?
Oh, yeah.
So
I am.
Great. The first question is from Chetan. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. What are some best practices to incorporate change management in an org where there's decentralized administration?
Oh, well, we could tackle this a couple of different ways. You could just be the shining star and start leading it yourself, right? Doing it today on your own and maybe getting others to follow suit. Or you could start to bring some of the individuals that are also, if it's decentralized, I'm assuming that people are in charge of the org in different areas, bringing them together. It's really important. And I bet you could start with like user adoption as one of those ways to get people to start to pay attention.
Excellent. Okay, we got one more question before we wrap. This is from Gayleen Dickens. Any ideas for building a custom object to track changes? I see some tools on the App Exchange, but I'm looking for a simple way to start to document changes to our org.
We do have one. It's pretty basic, but it routes and it allows us to have some notes. And most importantly, we do track like the people that would be impacted by the change. But I would start to just start to think of fields that would be important to your organization on that custom object, and start to in the sandbox, start to build it out.
Excellent, Liz. And I'm sure, if you've got more questions, please continue to post them in our admin webinar group on the Trailblazer community. Liz and I and others will be paying close attention and trying to answer all the questions that come in. So it doesn't end when I end this call in just a few seconds here. Thank you so much to Liz for sharing your incredible content you put together for Dreamforce with everyone on the call today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to invest in yourself and to make you a more awesome admin. Catch you next time in the cloud.